I'm the guy that's not an actor or a bestseller. Sorry. Yet, if you work hard, you can do it. Disclaimer, it's totally okay to laugh at this story. It's really weird. You already got a preview of like conversion therapy and you're thinking in your mind like, oh no, is he gonna cry on the stage? I won't, don't worry. So this story is about how literature saved my life and about how when all the avenues of empathy and kindness were sort of closed to me at a point in my life, literature was the thing that was able to bring me back and teach me to love again. So that's what this story is about. My dad, whenever I was 16, became a preacher. We'd gone to church like 3 times a week, our whole family. We lived in Arkansas in a small town. And, you know, we consider ourselves to be pretty normal Christians. And then one Sunday, we were sitting in church, and my dad starts shaking and crying. And my mom and I are like, oh no, what, you know, my dad never cries, so we're like, this is not good. And so he starts shaking and crying, and he goes up the aisle, and he starts talking to our preacher, and people gather around us, and they start saying, you need to come up to the front because your dad is now a preacher, and everyone's gonna come hug you. And my mom's like crying too because she's like, I didn't sign up for this, I'm not a preacher's wife. Like, what is this? And I'm like, uh-oh, because I'm 16 and I've just started to kind of, you know, think about my identity. And I realized, you know, I had these same-sex attractions, which is what you'll hear in a lot of ex-gay terminology. I was attracted to other boys. And my mom had also begun to suspect this, and she would sometimes say things like, you do like girls, right? I'd be like, yeah, I do. And I did have a girlfriend, actually, at the time. Poor Valerie, I'm sorry. I'm not supposed to say her name, and I just did. It's Chloe. So, yeah. So we go up, and like people are coming up to congratulate us, and I'm just like freaking out because I'm thinking, oh no, like what is gonna happen if people find out that I'm gay? Then my dad won't even have a job, like, because you need to know something about fundamentalism in the small town I grew up in. The children of parents are often seen as sort of the offspring of their either goodness or badness. So like, if I'm a bad preacher's kid, my dad has somehow failed as a father, which is a really horrible idea, but it was very prevalent in the place where I grew up. And with the fundamentalist Christianity, as many of you probably know, there's a literal interpretation of many things in the Bible. So that means like Adam and Eve were actually these 2 people and in a garden. And then Noah actually had 2 animals get on the ark and saved all of the animal kingdom. And yeah, that happened. So it takes away the idea of the Bible as a metaphor and changes it into something that believes that we've been around for 5,000 or 6,000 years. So this is the kind of environment I grew up in. And so it just didn't seem like an option at all that I could be gay, because in Leviticus, in the Old Testament, it says, thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind. And they meant it. So whenever this happened, my mom and I were just like terrified. But luckily, we had a little bit of a window. So my dad, the ordination process of becoming a preacher actually takes quite a long time. It's about like a 3 to 4 year period. They really vet you. Ugh, that term, I'm sorry. So they really check out your whole family history and everything. And during that time, during that window, I was outed to my parents. And my dad took me inside his bedroom and locked the door, and he said, okay, you have 2 options. Either you go to this ex-gay conversion therapy camp called Love in Action, which the name is pretty good. So either you go to this conversion therapy camp or you won't see your mom or me again. I know, it's a pretty bad ultimatum. So I'd grown up in the church. This was, by this point, 18 years of going to church all the time, Sunday school, praying every night to change. And God was capital G God, like a person that I believed in. And my family mattered, most of all to me. And so at this point, I'm thinking, this is probably crazy. Like I'd read enough, I'd been paying attention in classes enough to know that like maybe this was a really bad idea. But I thought, I've got to do it, at least for my family and at least to try to be who they want me to be. And so I don't know if you know this, but there's a really intense application process for a place like Love in Action. It's like harder than getting into some colleges. So you have to like talk about your mental history, your religious history, your sexual history in great detail with a private therapist who is connected to these camps. And at the time that I was doing this, there were 250 across the country. And the closest one was in Memphis, Tennessee. And I would travel back and forth. And even as I was going into my first year of college, I would go to that therapist and sort of tell everything about my life up to that point. And the therapist would basically say, okay, that's shameful and God doesn't believe in that. And here's a Bible verse to make you feel better. I'm backing it up with a Bible verse, so it's true. So during this process of the application and my dad sort of getting closer to ordination, I was in this really great literature class, and we were rereading The Scarlet Letter, and I'd read it in high school and I sort of hated it. And as most high school kids do, they're like, wait, this is too serious. And I was reading it, and it was almost like somebody had taken the top of my head off and like rearranged the furniture. Like the minute I read it in that context, I was like, oh, I get it now. Like Hawthorne was showing how an entire community could be wrong, and how the interior life of this person, Hester, was actually very important. She was a full human being with thoughts and feelings and emotions, and she was three-dimensional, not one-dimensional. And it was this, this black and white world became color. It was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm going to use a Wizard of Oz thing. It's like too obvious, but it was, okay. And so I'm going into, I go into Love in Action. I've passed the test. I'm very, very gay. And I need a lot of help. And so I go in, and I'm like, I've been reading The Scarlet Letter, so I'm like trying to write these short stories about like guilt and stuff, and it's fun. And I have this, it's fun for me anyway, as you'll see when you read the book. So I go in and I have my moleskin, and the process of entering the facility is really also pretty extreme. They make you sign your name in, and then they look through all of your pockets, belongings, wallet, etc., for anything that's called a false image. And a false image is like something that would distract you from the message that they're trying to tell you and to make you believe, which, later I learned was a classic cult technique. But I didn't know at the time. I was like, oh, that really stinks. And so when I had to hand over my short story, I had a female protagonist, and I described nature in a really, I think, florid way. And the guy was like, you can't do this. This is a false image. And so he ripped out the pages of my story and wadded it into a ball and threw it in the trash can in front of me. And in that moment, the two brains that I had, the literature brain and the God brain that was more fundamentalist, the literature brain started to die. And I could feel, this moment where I felt like if I was an artist, I would somehow be uncurable. And so we went through a lot of different activities. I'll give you a few highlights. It's really strange. So there was this thing called a genogram, which is actually used in regular therapy sessions. It's a family tree, and beside each family member's name, we were told to put these things called sin symbols, which were like alcoholism, A, which like you can see the Scarlet Letter is already there. Alcoholism, A, $ sign for gambling, and like M for murder, which I was disappointed that nobody in my family had been that bad. Um, and so it was designed to sort of like accumulate all the sins in your family and say why you were there. Like you've got an H by your name for homosexuality because your whole family was really bad. So it was that idea in the Bible about the sins of the fathers going to the sons. So they're taking this stuff very literally, right? And then another activity they did was what was called a moral inventory. And we would sit in these groups of different people that were there for a lot of different reasons. So there were people dealing with bestiality, there were people dealing with pedophilia, marriage issues, and we were all grouped together under the idea that we all had these sort of addictions. They used a lot of Freudian terminology. I mean, it was just sort of a hodgepodge of different ways to shame you. And this thing called a moral inventory required you to stand up in front of this group with the counselors in the back and tell any sexual idea or experience you've ever had. Now, I didn't have much to go on. So I didn't make things up, but I would just have to really stretch it. But you couldn't say it in a way that would create temptation. So it was like really strange. You'd be like, I had a moment where I thought about Richard in a way that was not right, and I saw him sitting there, and then I left the room, and it's like really strange. And then you would say a Bible verse at the end of it, and that was supposed to show how you overcame this temptation. And then people would clap and say, okay, good. And then and then the last activity I did at Love in Action, this was over a 2-week period. I was asked to sit across from an empty chair and imagine my father in it, which is another technique that therapists sometimes use. But the thing about Love in Action is that they always make it a little creepy in some way. So you sit across from this chair, and you have to imagine your dad, and they said you need to yell at him and tell him how much you hate him. And I said, I don't hate my dad. This is in front of everyone in an auditorium. I said, I don't hate my dad. I'm really sad. I'm disappointed, and I don't hate him. And they were like, no, you're hiding your emotions. You've been hiding your emotions since you've been here. And they called me out, and they kept trying to call me out. And I stood up, and I just said, no, this is not true. I don't actually hate him. And okay, so the literature part of my brain is thinking my dad is not a monster. There are circumstances that have created this. There are societal forces at play, right? And in that moment, the literature part of my brain took over temporarily. And I don't know how, but I got up and walked out of Love in Action. And I went to the receptionist, and I said, I need to talk to my mom. And he said, we can't do that. You're still in session. And I said, it's an emergency. You have to let me talk to my mom. So he gave me my phone back. I called her. She shows up, and the counselor runs out, and he's like, Garrard needs to stay, at least a month longer, a year longer. He's really gay. He's like not. It's like really bad. It's a bad case. He's rebellious. And my mom had a moment too. And I don't know. We talked about this later. I don't think she was reading anything per se, but I still call it the literature brain because critical thinking brain, really, because she finally said, I don't know why I didn't ask this, but what are your qualifications? No, really, she said that. You have to know what kind of place this is. This is like, this is what they said you had to do. And she said that, and he said, well, I was a marriage counselor, and I went to AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. And she was like, what is this guy doing telling my son how to be straight? And so she drove off, and when we were driving off, she said, do you think you're going to kill yourself? Because she'd seen me being really unhappy. And I just said yes, because I didn't know if I actually thought I would. I mean, I was really unhappy. I was at a point where I felt suicidal, but I knew it was the answer that was going to actually get me home. And ever since then, 10 years have passed. I've written this book. It's obviously complicated. It's been messy. Our family has been very messy. And my mom now, though, shows up to my readings. She stands and tells her story sometimes. She's very supportive. She's like a gay icon now. All these, if you saw her, she's got this Dolly Parton look that's very Southern Belle. And she loves her role. Of course she does. Who doesn't want to be worshipped by a bunch of gay men who tell you, you look beautiful all the time? Um, and so, so like, and then my dad and I, like, we don't always talk about it, but we exchange poetry now, and it turns out my dad really likes poetry, and so that's what we often like talk about poetry. I just got him to read a female poet. I thought it was a real, earlier it was just like the old male poets, and I was like, let me try to sneak in like a woman so we can like make him a little better. Okay, so it's messy, but now we see each other for who we are. We actually see ourselves as three-dimensional people, just like literature taught me. And I wouldn't be on the stage talking to you today if I hadn't had that first year experience with my literature class. Thank you.